Welcome to the Interop. Today, my guest is Rushi Manche, co-founder at Movement Labs. Movement is a network of modular, move-based blockchains. In today's conversation, we'll discuss the growing narrative around DA and modular chains, M2, their move-based L2, and M1, their decentralized shared sequencer. We'll talk about their recent partnership announcement with Noble and Union to bring native USDC to the Move ecosystem. We'll discuss experimentation in Cosmos and the growing landscape of alternative VMs and Movement's product roadmap. I'm also dying to find out why he thinks the EVM is going to zero. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to get notified when new episodes drop every week. And remember that none of what we discuss here on the Interop is investment advice. And if you enjoy this content, please consider staking with us. We're validating on Evmos, Quicksilver, Osmosis, and Juno. Just look for Interop in the active set. My guest, Rushi Manche, is coming up next, right here on the Interop. I'm here with Rushi Manche. Thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Appreciate it, man. Second time's a charm.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of fun when like the podcast has been running for so long that there's like repeat guests.
Yeah.
And there's been a few now, so it's it's cool, and also it's an opportunity to look back on our last conversation and just get an update, because there's been so much going on with Movement. You guys are like all over the place. You're on all the podcasts. You're all over Twitter. Lots of announcements and all sorts of things coming up for 2024. So congrats on all of this success and growth. The community's been growing and people are excited about Movement.
Yeah, appreciate it. I think it's been like a kind of good beating of the drum where like every week we're building momentum, and the cards are aligning where Celestia has been crushing it. The Manche thesis is crushing it. Cosmos is crushing it. Seems like everyone's winning and we're like in the center of everything. So I'm just grateful for all our supporters and you especially.
Well, with pleasure. Where in 2023 we saw a lot of narratives kind of come together, and I sort of see 2023 as a year of narrative validation. Of course, we had Celestia, which validated the modular thesis. DYDX coming online also validated the app chain thesis as well, and I mean those two sort of come together. And I wonder, in 2024, like what's left in terms of a narrative validation, specifically in the modular space, because you guys are so present there. What are the things that we still need to prove to the space in terms of bringing modularity to blockchains?
Yeah, so 2023 is kind of the year of like the DA race. You had like Celestia come to market, you had Eigen DA, and then you had like a Veil kind of push the near like the DA narrative. The issue there was like DA is pretty expensive in Ethereum, takes up 80-90% of all fees. So the thesis was, okay, swap out the dealer, so rollups can have better like DA settlement layers. 2024 is kind of the year of the VM. It's kind of like why I have a VM Wars podcast. It's kind of dedicated to that, where we're actually seeing experimentation at the VM level. It's kicked off by Solana's crazy bull run, where like everyone came back to Solana ecosystem. Obviously price action, but also saw a lot more experimentation from different ecosystems. And even like the OG Ethereum folks, like the Aves of the world, started saying, hey, we want to deploy on top of Solana. We love the SVM. Eclipse brought the SVM to Ethereum. So that was kind of kick start of that. And then this year we've seen like an explosion of that, where you have us for the Move VM, you have CK Wasm groups coming up, experimenting with TypeScript and JavaScript on Ethereum. So this year, Modular is really focused on experimentation and execution level. I think the EVM has been broken for a while. It's weak. There's $4 billion lost every year in smart contract hacks. It's slow. We saw inscriptions kind of take down every EVM network, and the only ones that survived were like the parallelized ones, the next gen ones. So the narrative is clear in that you can still use Ethereum, you can still use all liquidity benefits, you can be connected to IBC and bring in all the Cosmos communities and all the tooling there. You can live on Celestia for DA with the cheaper DA phase and addressing that solution. And the final piece in this like Rubik's Cube is the VM level, where we can experiment with different solutions like Solana Virtual Machine, the Move Virtual Machine, and see which is brought to the market in the best possible way.
So your take on Ethereum, I think, is interesting. I mean, it's definitely an extreme one. I
Yep.
think like this idea that the EVM is going to zero, a lot of people would push back on that.
Yep.
What's the thesis here for the, let's say, like in 10 years from now,
Yep.
what will we be using the EVM for, if anything?
I think that comes down to Solidity, right? Solidity is very analogous to JavaScript in this case. JavaScript is a great language, like used by 17 million people, or something ridiculous. It's a good language to start off the birth of Web3, the birth of like JavaScript was for Web2, but there was much better iterations upon Solidity and JavaScript that is more enhanced for blockchains. So, for example, Move was built by the Facebook and the DM program, literally the biggest consumer app in the world. Looked at blockchain and was like, Solidity can't scale. If we ever want to bring our billion users to blockchains, we can't be getting hacked for billions, eventually trillions of dollars. Consumer assets need to be safe, as well as if I'm bringing millions of users to my network, it needs to be able to do more than 5 TPS, 10 TPS. Inscriptions kind of showed that no EVM could do above 100 TPS. I think that was the highest number that we got. So looking at if we ever want to bring consumer apps and actually adoption to what we're all here for, it's clear that next gen virtual machines are the key. However, the Ethereum virtual machine still is like the predecessor. Solidity still has all the mindshare, and most developers are still there. So the way we approach it, and kind of what most people in the space are approaching, is embedding backwards compatibility in that still supporting Solidity smart contract. If I'm a Solidity developer, if I'm Uniswap, I can still deploy on top of next gen virtual machine. However, either through a transpiler, either through a hybrid VM, which is what Say is doing, either through like a complete restructured EVM, which is what Manad's doing, um, we should be able to scale the EVM in other ways. We approach that through a transpiler, so we accept Solidity script, but we still run the move VM under the hood. So I wouldn't say that EVM, like the EVM itself is different from Solidity. I would say Solidity is still around because most smart contracts are in that. But I think there's better ways to enhance the Ethereum virtual machine in a way that you can still run Solidity on top of next gen VMs.
Do you foresee blue chip smart contracts on Ethereum rewriting their entire code base in other VMs, or leveraging something like Move or Movement to transpile their applications to another VM? Or do you think the EVM will evolve to support other languages? Like, now this has been like in the works for years with Viper and hasn't really played out, but where do you see that heading in terms of the EVM potentially evolving to continue to support these, multi tens of billions of dollar blue chip applications that will, potentially be like in the hundreds of billions in coming years?
Yeah, I think Stani's been like the most vocal about this in terms of the Sonic system. Like he wants Aave on top of Neon, which is kind of like the EVM solution for Solana. So still able to use like a parallelized runtime, still using next gen virtual machine, but bringing a compatibility with the whole Aave stack. Aave is interesting because obviously like because it's cross chain and there's a whole lending markets. If you have like one network go down, it kind of creates like a trickle effect. So security is really important in making sure like the standard is the same across chains. So I think there's already been a lot of mind share around can we look at Solana and bring blue chip protocols to that ecosystem. So I think the first kind of adoption will happen at Solana level, and they'll trickle down to like moving system and other networks. In terms of like the EVM, like it kind of depends on what angle you're looking at. I think like Viper didn't show much improvements. Like the curve attack was a Viper vulnerability, which was still a re-entry bug. So Viper has like minimal improvements, if not like if any. There's still a lot of vulnerabilities. The issue is at the VM level itself. I don't believe that like the Ethereum Foundation or any groups can really tackle it in the near to short term as quick as like the Solanas of the world, the movements of the world, Aptos and Swedes of the world can address issues. So it's kind of like how the question is, are blue chip protocols going to adopt next gen VMs first, or is like the Ethereum Foundation going to be able to create EIPs that can substantially be improved? I've seen a lot of different EIPs around security and performance, and those usually don't allow backwards compatibility, so people need to completely rewrite their Solidity code anyway. And B, it's like years out, and there's no like formidable plans yet. While like next gen VMs have a clear roadmap for adoption.
I mean, I could definitely see it going that way. I mean, the counter case here is PHP, right? In
Yep.
Web 2, and like PHP's been around for like 20 years, I think like 25 years now.
Yep.
We've anybody who's been in the Web 2 space or has been building web applications for a long time, has been saying that PHP would die, many times. It's like Bitcoin is dead. Like
Yeah.
PHP was supposed to be dead years ago, and it still powers like I think something like 60 to 70% of websites on the internet, because there's like a few applications that still use it at scale, like WordPress and Facebook and a few others. Do you think that like there's a space for Solidity code still continues to power very large applications in this space, but is mostly seen as like a legacy language, while new developers and like all the new applications leveraging the modular stack will be using things like movement and other VMs, but that Solidity will continue to be this kind of like legacy supported language, using the VM for like decades to come.
Yeah, I was a PHP dev before I got into crypto, and I hated it.
Same.
But I think is that's like exactly how I see it, right? Like Solidity, the EVM is legacy code. Like it'll always be referred, like even Bitcoin script technically is legacy, and like Ethereum was upgraded to that. But like Bitcoin is still Bitcoin, obviously, and there's still like a bunch of BRC20 stuff and still innovations happening there. So I think there's a market for both in that legacy code and legacy like OG DeFi protocols will still remain EVM dominant, whereas the next gen of innovation is going to happen next gen level. If I'm a new developer coming to the space, it's actually more profitable and more intuitive for me to learn Rust and Rust-based languages because A, the average salary for that is like twice that of Solidity, and B, there's much more use cases. Like Solana, I would say is like the best place to do a payments app, payments across the world at like less than a fraction of a cent, like instantaneous. You can't really do that on Ethereum. Can't really do that anywhere else. Move is like the best to do secure programming. So if you want to build like a financial app that's not going to get hacked, as well as like dynamic NFTs and a bunch of other things that Move enable, that's the best language to pick up. So I think there's a bunch of different use cases that are going to see light in the next 2 or 3 years that really highlight Move, highlight Solana VM. Move specifically is big for gaming. So when that big gaming Web3 run comes, I believe it's going to be in the Web3 ecosystem is going to happen at the Move level. So yeah, I think it's also similar to the AI industry. Microsoft's announced their big pivot to Rust, and like announcing that their code bases are predominantly Rust based. Before that, like AI wasn't like that, like 20 years ago, right? But now we're seeing much more innovation happen in the Rust realm across different industries.
Cool. Well, let's move on to movement. So we last had you on in June. So anybody who is interested in getting sort of a high level about like, what is movement and what is the vision there should go back and listen to that episode, because I think it sort of covers movement at a high level. We're going to get into a little bit more detail here about some of the things that have come out since then. For instance, you guys like announced the M2 for supporting rollups, and you also announced this partnership with Noble and Union to bring USDC and Ethereum security to move rollups. We'll also talk about the roadmap, but let's just maybe start with a brief overview of what is movement and what's the vision there, and specifically what does movement bring to the modular stack.
Yeah, so Thesis is a network of Move-based blockchains where we see and envision a bunch of different blockchains, eventually market share being predominantly in Move's programming languages. In the past, there were monolithic giants like Aptos and Sui that really spearheaded the Move VM charge. But there's a lot of bottlenecks in terms of interoperability. It was difficult to acquire liquidity, acquire new infrastructure, get new users. So our thesis was we want to see Move adopted at scale, whether for app chains, whether it's for general purpose L2, and really see adoption there. So within Movement, we have M2, the first Move EVM rollup on Ethereum. At the execution level, it's the Move virtual machine paired with Ethereum EVM compatibility. So it supports Solidity code as well as Move smart contracts. It lives on Ethereum for settlement, so you have native ETH directly into the protocol, as well as the decentralization and liquidity that Ethereum provides. And then DA is powered by Celestia, obviously for cheaper transaction fees and better performance. And that's connected to M1, which in the past was a subnet, but we modified it to be a decentralized shared sequencer. The thesis is there centralized sequencers in today's market won't scale, they can't keep up performance in next generation blockchains. In this world, we're doing 10,000, 20,000 TPS. You can't have one node that can potentially go down and ruin all those transactions. And secondary, it's just not profitable in that DA is making transaction fees much more cheaper. We saw with Celestia to Manta, and then next-gen VMs bring that cost down to like less than a 1 cent. So centralized sequencers can't scale and are actually bad for the community. Our M1 network is a decentralized shared sequencer that can power the M2 rollup, as well as other move-based rollups that connect to the network. So basically the first move layer 2 on Ethereum, providing solvency for other move rollups as well.
How do you achieve a sequencer that is both shared and decentralized without just building another blockchain that also needs its own settlement layer?
Yeah, so we kind of deprecate the smart contract functionality of M1. So at scale, you won't be able to publish smart contracts to it. Instead, the validators are all focused on sequencing the transactions for M2. So if you look at Espresso, Radiant, some of these other shared sequencers, they follow a similar model where they have a set of validators. Cell even does this for their layer 1, which they announced for layer 2, where existing validators all stake the native token. So if I'm an Avalanche validator, I can stake the move token and then participate in the sequencing for the layer 2. And then all the fees that are generated from the layer 2 are then distributed back to the validators. So there's actually a double-pronged approach where validators are not only getting APY from emissions, but also getting a large percentage of the sequencing fees. So it's kind of double-pronged benefit for running nodes, which in turn incentivizes them to run more nodes, which creates a further decentralized and eventually permissionless sequencing network for layer 2s.
So let's maybe zoom into M2 a little bit here. So M1 previously was to be this smart contract blockchain using Move, where one could deploy Move smart contracts. That's what we talked about in the last episode. So that has shifted now and is now a decentralized shared sequencer that will have its own validator set. I want to come back to that in a minute. And then M2 is a roll-up framework, correct? Where anyone can, take that package and deploy it as a roll-up on top of any other DA layer, modular DA layer, and security layer. What are some of the ways that M2 that you can configure M2 to work with, say, like Celestia or other DA layers?
So M2 is a general purpose chain. So it's this layer 2 that you deploy smart contracts to. It's like Optimism or Arbitrum Eclipse. You can deploy smart contracts that have DeFi, TVL, all that stuff. The Move stack is the framework where you can deploy your own Move rollups. So let's say we have a few gaming protocols already doing this and going to be live over the next 3 to 4 weeks. Where let's say I'm my own gaming app, I want my own environment, I have my own bridges and oracles, I want to use EigenDA instead of Celestia for data availability, I want to use the ZK stack or OP stack or one of these other frameworks. We're compatible with all those different frameworks and DA layers. I can launch my own Move rollup using the Move VM, the Move EVM, and connect to the sequencer network. So you'll have M2, which is this like the Optimism mainnet, where you have a general purpose Move EVM rollup that includes TVL, liquidity, and it's like a liquidity hub. And then you have other Move rollups, particularly gaming. We're seeing a lot of interest, where you can launch next generation rollups with 10,000 plus TPS connected to Ethereum liquidity, and then connecting to a sequencer network, so you can do swaps between different chains. Hopefully that clarifies it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive in, because I think this kind of ties into the Noble and Union partnership to some extent, right? Because these are the sort of like other layers of the stack that make this possible. So with M2, we'll be able to deploy. So M2 is its own chain on which you can deploy smart contracts, but you can also use the movement framework to deploy your own app-specific roll-up.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, all right. So, like, as a developer, like, what's the decision tree to deploy as a movement as an M2 smart contract, or to go ahead and like deploy your own app-specific roll-up using movement?
Yeah, I think not every app needs its own app chain. In fact, let's say I'm a lending protocol, I probably want to deploy on top of the main M2 chain so I can interact with other like apps and users on my network. It's just like any other L2 or any other blockchain where if I'm deploying a general purpose app with DeFi, gaming, whatever, and I don't need my own sovereign environment, it's better, just easier to just deploy an M2. If I'm a specialized game, if I have my own use cases, if I need my own like bridging solutions, my own DA solutions, I have a partnership with like a Polygons of the world, the Optimism of the world, and I can't use the current stack, I can still leverage the Move framework, launch my own custom Move rollup on the CDK, on the OP stack, whatever you want, on whatever DA layer, and then have my own custom sovereign environment where no one else can be involved. So we've seen that a lot with app chain, specifically gaming, because gaming requires high throughput. So if you're deploying on top of like a main settlement chain like M2, it may clog up the network. You won't see the performance that you want. Whereas if you have your own sovereign app chain, it's yours and yours only, essentially.
And the M2 chain itself, it leverages. It's not leveraging Celestia DA. It is its own chain with its own validator set, right?
So it is leveraging Celestia for DA, but lives on
Okay.
Ethereum for settlement. So it uses Blockstream in that case.
Okay. That's cool. Okay, so it uses Celestia DA and Ethereum for settlement. So it's effectively an Ethereum rollup.
Yep.
Okay, got it. And when it comes to the sort of like Union and Noble integration here, so you guys announced like this partnership with Noble and Union recently. What is the role of Union and Noble in the stack?
Yeah, so typically next generation chains like even after Sensui, I was contributing to the first DEX in Aptos, and I can tell you the biggest pain was not having native USDC day zero, and having like, two assets on the DEX wasn't the most profitable and useful DEX in the world. Now with M2, you can have native USDC out of the box. So Union is building Solomon-like client machines to connect us to the Union chain, which then connects us to like Noble via IBC. So if I'm a DEX deploying on top of M2, now have native USDC provided by Noble, linked via IBC, which is insured with Union's Solo-like client machine. And if I'm a Move Stack client, or if I'm anyone launching my own Move rollup connected to the network, you also have native USDC out of the box. So if I'm a game deploying my own gaming rollup, or I'm like an order book deploying my own order book rollup, I can connect to M2 with IBC, still leverage the Union IBC connectivity, and have USDC out of the box, which is something that most app chains, if not all app chains, can't do.
Okay, so as an application living on as a sovereign rollup, using Celestia DA, that Celestia will send a proof to Union that a transaction's occurred, and then that will trigger Noble to move assets in and out of Noble's app chain. I mean, can you still call that native USDC once it's sitting on Union? I mean, it's sort of like one step away from being native, right? I mean, it's like native to the US to the IBC ecosystem.
Yep.
Does the fact that it requires Celestia DA to provide an extra layer of security there, does that not sort of no longer make it, this one hop away from Noble kind of native USDC as we would expect it to be in the IBC ecosystem, or is it effectively the same?
It's effectively the same because Union just proofs a settlement layer. So when they are checking for whether transactions go through the chain, they're able, let's say I'm launching on sovereign rollup and selling to Ethereum, Noble or Union sends proofs directly to the Union chain and then relays that to Noble. So adding Celestia in doesn't change anything. The only thing that would change is if you don't use Ethereum for settlement and you're just using like a sovereign rollup with your own consensus mechanism, that might make it one hop away additionally, which is probably like a custom challenge that you need to do with Union and take care of that yourself. But if you're just using Ethereum for settlement and you have the same value set, it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, so this partnership announcement mostly concerns applications that are going to be using M2.
Yeah.
But for applications that are using Move with another settlement layer, or they're settling in some other way, they would not like have native USDC in the same way that M2 applications would.
Yeah, the partnership's mostly focused on M2, getting a prototype up. It's already pretty experimental on that end. And then eventually the vision is to eventually have out of the box USDC, and I'm sure Union's putting together stuff for that. But the focus is on M2 at the moment.
What about other other DA providers? Like how could they provide alternatives to Celestia? I mean, I guess for M2 that wouldn't be the case since like M2 has some sort
Yep.
of partnership with Celestia, but settlement rollups could
Yep.
potentially use another DA solution, right?
Yep. So we have partnerships already with Avail. IGND is coming out shortly, and then Near as well. So if I'm a game developer and I want to sell on Near, Near has high traffic for consumer and gaming. I can swap at Celestia, settle on Near, use OP Stack or the Polygon CDK, and use the Move VM and have my own custom rollup. We're actually partnering with the rest of the world, shortly being announced. So it can be a one-click button. So you can essentially do a drag and drop of like Celestia, Avail, Eigen, whatever, use whatever rollup stack, and then use our VM, and it'll be like a one-click deployment. Where the RAS is actually will handle all the infrastructure. So I'm a game developer. I focus on my game. I can use whatever rollup stack, use whatever DA layer, and the RAS itself will take care of it.
Okay. And what's the Fractal module? I read about this module and I'd
Yep.
like to maybe explain how it works.
So it's an EVM runtime that sits upon the Move VM. The biggest issue that we face, like we touched on, is yeah, next gen VMs are great, but all the developer activity today and all the liquidity today is on the EVM, and probably in the near to short term will still remain on the EVM. So essentially, it's our backwards compatibility solution in that if I'm Uniswap, if I'm like an Avalanche app or an Optimism app, I can keep my Solidity code and then deploy on top of the EVM runtime that takes the Solidity code, the 145 opcodes, maps to the 45 move opcodes, and launch in the VM. So it has Ethereum JSON RPC, fully MetaMask compatible. It's atomically composable with any move transaction. So if you have a move multisig and you have an EVM multisig, they can communicate atomically on the VM itself. So it works, talks, and looks like an EVM, but runs the move VM under the hood. Similar to like Solana and Solana.
Okay, so for those who aren't like super technical, can you explain how this module like maps the Ethereum opcodes to the Move opcodes, and why are there so many in Ethereum and so fewer in Move?
Yeah, one of the security benefits of Move is that there's like a third of the opcodes, so it's like basically pretty much no vulnerabilities. Whereas having so many opcodes is like a downside of Solidity. How the mapping works is essentially like you create like if you have like a many to one pairing, you can say like, okay, if I invoke a swap function in Solidity, I'm going to invoke equivalent function Move. But given the fact that there's more Solidity opcodes and less Move opcodes, you essentially have a Solidity library. So if I want to invoke a function in Move that's not covered by Solidity, I can invoke a third-party library that's like the movement client, and write functions there. If there's a Solidity function, every Solidity function is handled by Move because it is like a successor to Solidity. So essentially, any transaction like Uniswap, any gaming transaction with an EVM, you just like kind of invoke a transaction on the Move side.
Okay, so in the case of Move, there are fewer opcodes, and so
Yep.
in order to achieve the same results as you would with the 140 some opcodes in Ethereum,
Yep.
Move has to make like more. It sort of like constructs those opcodes by
Yep.
joining different opcodes together.
Yep.
Okay. So an opcode like to a developer, when you're writing code,
Mhm.
you write this code in this language that you can read, and you can create like sort of functions and declare variables and have conditionals,
Yep.
etc. And then what the compiler does is it takes all of that code and it essentially just transforms it into like a series of opcodes, and those opcodes are read by the blockchain and end up executing the transactions. So the opcodes are sort of like the equivalent to, I suppose, like assembly, right? I mean, it's
Yes.
like this low level code that's interpreted by the machine. In the case of so like with regards to the security of Move, what are some of the more sort of risky opcodes, or like opcodes in Ethereum that are the biggest targets for attacks?
Yeah. So it's like
Or
the
is it
withdrawal.
a combination of opcodes put together that enable things like reentrancy?
Yeah, like the withdraw function is something like Solidity is notorious for. If you look at the curve attack, like you can just like see like the withdraw function or the send function or the transfer function is just like repeatedly abused because there's like integer overflow. There's like a type mishap that's not taken care of by the compiler. Even like the Kyber attack was like a 0.0001% vulnerability that no auditor could pick up. and like it's a combination of opcodes, right? So sometimes it's like every like the withdraw function is fine, the transfer function is fine separately, but when you call withdraw and transfer next to each other, that's when the issue comes up because you didn't handle the integer types properly. Um, so it can be sometimes just one individual opcode you completely messed up, or it can be like if you have three opcodes together that were all awful, then that's also an issue. It's usually at the function level. Opcode is like in this case would be the UL intermediate language, so it's similar to assembly, but it's like called UL for blockchains. And then that's kind of the low level bytecode. And on like solidity level, which is high level, you have like the withdraw function, transfer function that connect to these opcodes.
When you look at it this way, it sounds as though you could just have you could compile move code directly to Ethereum opcodes. I mean, if you guys are already doing this, transforming if Solidity into Move, wouldn't you be able to also write Move code that compiles down to the EVM?
Yeah, I've seen a few like attempts at this, but it hasn't. It's definitely possible, and I think it's something that we could potentially do. It just like there's not big of a market there because the thesis behind Solidity to Move is attracting more developers. There's too few Move developers, so it doesn't make sense to go the other way around because you'll get like five more developers. In a perfect world where like every like developer counts the same, and it's like 1,000 Move developers, 1,000 EVM developers, it makes the most sense to move to EVM. So you can still deploy on top of mainnet Ethereum and write alternative smart contract languages. I think like Nitro was like a SVM on EVM, something like that. Or Nitro was SVM on Cosmos was on EVM. There's been like Solana implementations of the other way around, but I don't think anyone has done move to EVM.
Okay, interesting. This is really interesting stuff. I'd love to maybe do like a full episode just on this topic.
Yeah, I'll probably need to bring engineers in who can hopefully do a better job of explaining it.
So coming back to the movement Noble Union partnership, so Aptos and Sui don't have native USDC, but so would this enable some form of native USDC for Aptos and Sui applications? I mean, could you consider it to be native, or would it be like sort of move wrapped USDC, which is effectively sort of one step away from USDC
Well,
for those ecosystems?
USDC right now on Apps and Suite is like wormhole wrapped USDC, which is good solution for like short term, but it's a pain to use if you ever tried it. Like any bridge USDC, because let's say for example you're bridging from like Aptos to Sui to Solana to Polkadot to Near, it's wrapping each time you do that. So you'll have like five different versions of USDC by like those five different transactions, which as a developer is a nightmare. As a user, you'll see like five different wormhole USDCs. Whereas with us, you'll just have the one I like Noble USDC. If you're sending it from, let's say you have a DEX on top of M2 and you want to have TIA, you can or swap TIA for USDC. You're still using the Noble USDC. If you want to send the USDC to Osmosis, the same USDC obviously. If you want to send a USDC to Wormhole Gateway and then connect that Wormhole Gateway to Aptos, same standard. So we don't have multiple standards of USDC because we just have that native USDC. Obviously, the definition of native is when Circle itself directly deploys on top of the chain, which is probably a ways out for even Aptos and Sui, as well as like a bunch of other chains. Well, I would say like, this is like the second best option to that, where it's the same standard, it's not like a UX nightmare, and you still have like a redeemer, which is Noble in this case.
Cool. So what are the benefits that, like, how does the IBC ecosystem benefit from having, Move essentially be part of IBC now?
I think you just have more apps being able to deploy and use IBC. There'll be more transactions happening on the IBC Relay network because now the entire Move ecosystem, both Aptos, Sui, and EVM protocols, can directly call IBC transactions. I'm a firm believer that IBC is one of the best, if not the best, bridging mechanism on the planet. And so far in the past, it was pretty much confined to like Cosmos app chains, um, like Cosmos and VMs. This, for the first time, enables Move to come to IBC, which comes back to experimentation thesis of having different use cases. Now, let's say, for example, you want to do like a secure vault that pretty much can't be hacked, or you want to do like a next-gen gaming dynamic NFT app. Now you can get USDC directly into the ecosystem, and all powered by IBC in the back end. So long story short, brings Move and other VMs to the Cosmos ecosystem in a way that wouldn't have been done before.
So zooming out a little bit here, I want to talk about Cosmos and sort of movement's position within the Cosmos ecosystem. I think, if we look at Cosmos, there was a pre-IBC Cosmos, and then there's been the era of like Cosmos and IBC, and now we're entering the modular Cosmos era, or the era with Cosmos plus DA and rollups. So I'd like you to maybe comment on how you see the future of Cosmos, and specifically, like, how does all of this pertain to the app chain thesis, and how should we be thinking about Cosmos in the context of the app chain thesis with all of these new developments?
Yeah, I think the past Cosmos was just like zones. So you have to use Cosmos SDK, you have to use Tendermint, you use Comet BFT, and then you had IBC. So it kind of shut out most of the Ethereum community and most of the L1 community. Now Cosmos, and my definition for Cosmos, is now any chain that leverages IBC and uses IBC as interconnection, which now opens up the possibility to literally every chain. You have now Avalanche with like some landside connection. You have Composable bringing IBC to Solana. You have Union bringing IBC to Ethereum. So over the next few years, the Cosmos is going to encompass everything, or every mainnet rollup, every mainnet chain is going to be using IBC to connect to Cosmic system. Cosmos is used under the hood, and chains get branded as rollups. They can leverage app chains. They can do whatever they want, particularly for movement that allows next generation apps and like move assets to be listed within the Cosmic system. So if I'm Osmosis, I can list the Tala token, I can list Aftermath token, I can list Sui, Aptos, which Sui has been doing particularly well over the last few weeks. So that's another great asset to have on the Osmosis DEX natively. And then zooming out even further, like Solana is a big ecosystem that Composable is trying to connect to, and having Sol on like Lavana, having Sol assets like Jito on top of Osmosis, and enabling those traders to use like Osmosis as a general hub. Really allows for a lot of experimentation and more permissionless interoperability. So if I'm doing a new VM, for example, let's say that's a better VM that comes out than Move, they can now connect to Cosmos, connect to Osmosis, and have all that liquidity available. So you have more like permissionless interop, which is kind of what Hyperlane is focused on.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that view that Cosmos is effectively becoming the network of IBC connected applications and chains. I think that's a narrative that makes sense because it kind of departs away from Cosmos being very tied, at least from a narrative perspective, to the hub. I mean, I think the hub will continue to, obviously it carries the name, right? So
Yep.
it's hard for the entire narrative to detach from that. But I think that in the broader, when you talk to people that are not in Cosmos, a lot of times, thinking about Cosmos is like, they're thinking about the hub, right? And they're thinking about this sort of like vision of Cosmos of 2019, which was the hub was meant to be this liquidity hub that would sit between app chains and other ecosystems like Bitcoin and Ethereum and Polkadot, etc. And that needs to change if people are going to take the Cosmos stack seriously. And I think that the best chance for that to happen is for more applications to use Cosmos, in the context of, say, like using Celestia as a modular DA layer. They're using Cosmos stack, using IBC, using Noble, and that brings us into the next step, or the next evolution of Cosmos, which is essentially that Cosmos is just technology that sits behind all of these applications. There isn't necessarily like a token or inherent value accrual to that technology. It's just great technology, and I think that kind of reflects what I think it was Sam and Ethan were recently on one of the Blockworks podcasts, and we're talking about this, right? The end game is for all applications to be using Cosmos stack, to be using the Cosmos technology stack, and I think that's sort of where things are heading. And certainly as a fund, that's where we look also as like applications that are using the stack more so than applications that align with a specific narrative.
It truly is the internet of blockchains, which is like the original thesis behind Cosmos, right? And now we're seeing it's like exciting, right? You're seeing like every blockchain trying to use IBC in some capacity. So it's effectively becoming internet, which is the end game.
That is the end game for sure. also, I think one of the characteristics of Cosmos in 2024 is that there's a lot of experimentation happening. Obviously, the entire sort of DA narrative and the modular stack, Cosmos had a big role to play there in terms of making that possible. And there are quite a few new VMs emerging there. So, Cosmosm, of course, is one of them. The Movement stack and the Move VM is another. And I think some people are also like looking at novel VMs in the Celestia space. So, what's your take on all this experimentation that's happening here, and like what's the long-term view in terms of having compatibility and an application ecosystem that can flourish without having too many incompatibilities between these different VMs?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the JavaScript example, right? Like my knowledge is like Move is to Rust as like React is JavaScript. So when JavaScript first like came out, it was like huge, like people loved it. And then like people were like, oh, it's not that great. Like let's build frameworks on top of it. So you had React, you had Vue, you had Angular. Those are the ones that really won the mind share. But you had like 10, 15, 20 others that tried to make it. It's gonna be the same thing where you have this like unraveling of these different VMs. So you'll have Move, you'll have like Solana VM, you'll have a Cosmos, which is also Rust based. You'll have like ZK Wasm, which now is like TypeScript, and JavaScript, which is kind of what like Gork did a while back, and still is trying to do. I'm sure there'll be like 5 other VMs that come up in the next 2 years, right? The question is like, what's going to actually solve for the problems in the past? Who's going to have the best go to market? Who's going to have the best adoption strategies? And then it's going to be kind of raveling again of where the top 3 win. So similar to how you had like React, Angular, Vue that won the kind of race to the top, but you had like 15 others that kind of went extinct. I think that's going to happen with VMs, right? Which is why I call it VM wars. You'll have like 15 VMs that hopefully pop up, a lot of experimentation, a lot of great innovation, great builders, but there's only going to be like 3 that actually make it in a 10, 20-year horizon. And our bet is the language made by Facebook is the one that's going to win.
So you said that there might be 2 or 3 that would end up dominating the market. What are some of the other ones that the other VMs that you're interested or bullish on?
I mean, Solana VM is a no-brainer, right? I think like Solana has done a great job. The community is like maybe the strongest community out there, and it just makes a lot of sense. Parallelization, high throughput, Fire Dancer is going to completely revolutionize Solana mainnet, and Eclipse is doing a great job bringing the Solana VM to the modular stack. So I think Solana VM is a no-brainer choice there. And I think the last one I would say is like ZK Wasm. In this world where you are trying to bring new developers to space, there's a lot of developers that want to write JavaScript code, TypeScript code, Python code, Rust code, and having support for all those different languages is a great virtual machine. So ZK Wasm has been done, like Wasm has been done with Arbitrum, with Stylus. Fluent is a great team doing ZK Wasm and bringing ZK Wasm to Ethereum. So essentially enabling developers to write multiple languages and then compiling that down to Wasm, which Move actually can be done. So it's an interesting angle to explore, and running that in the VM.
So let's talk a little bit about the roadmap. You guys recently published your Parthenon roadmap,
Yep.
And which details the different phases of movement. So yeah, walk us through the next couple of months.
Yeah, so we're gearing up for incentivized test and launch. Our DevNet's been out for a while, and we were kind of putting a lot of efforts towards that, but now it's time to the big show. So Parthenon is kind of our transparent, like open source roadmap where we're enabling kind of bootstrapping the Validator network. One reason we wanted to kind of unveil this is we want our network to be eventually decentralized and permissionless. So we're starting off with the first phase, which is this like closed source validator, bootstrapping M1 validator set, probably like 10 to 15 validators just to get the product up. And then the second phase is extending the validator set to the community. So we'll have 100 plus validators to kind of bootstrap the validator set. Eventually, it's going to be completely permissionless, so anyone can run their own validator to participate in the sequencing set. That transitions into launching M2, where M1 becomes a decentralized shared sequencer to power the M2 mainnet rollup. So by the end of this kind of testnet phase, you will have M2, the first move rollup on Ethereum, powered by a completely decentralized validator set that supports both Aptos and Sui Move, as well as full even compatible. And we're doing kind of 2 steps. So A, we can monitor progress from the community, and B, always be transparent in what we're doing in terms of testnet progress, as well as how we're developing as a company.
So M1, I want to come back to this, to M1 and the decentralized shared sequencer. Now, everyone I've talked to about decentralized shared sequencer has told me that they're not real. Now I haven't spent a whole lot of time, I guess, trying to understand why that is. But my understanding is basically when you have a decentralized shared sequencer, you basically have another blockchain
Yep.
that needs itself to be sequenced.
Yep.
Now, I thought we talked about this before, but I really wanted to like open this up a little bit. Let's double click on that and just explain why you've solved decentralized shared sequencing while other people think that this is just a myth.
Yeah, any L1 or L2, any blockchain can be a decentralized shared sequencer. That is like the definition of consensus mechanism. Any consensus mechanism tenement can be a decentralized shared sequencing. So there's been a few groups that have tried shared sequencing in the past, and every time you ask them, they're like, oh, Arbitrum and Optimism will integrate our shared sequencer. Then you ask anyone from Arbitrum and Optimism, and it's like, yeah, we're never actually going to really do that, or it's like on the roadmap, and they kind of put it aside. The issue is there's no incentive for L2s to ever decentralize sequencer in today. Arbitrum and Base are printing money to the point where it's ridiculous at the moment, right? The fees are great. The community is great. Like it's a very profitable business. So there's no reason for them to ever decentralize sequencer. If I'm making $1 million a month, why would I voluntarily give up that revenue? What's interesting about our model is we're forced to do so because our fees are extremely low. We'll have one of the lowest, if not the lowest, fee model on the L2, so it'll be the cheapest L2 in the market because we use Celestia for DA. We have a parallelized VM at the execution level, so our cheaps are next to nothing. Our fees are next to nothing. So that means our sequencer fees are also next to nothing. And then B, we actually have an embedded token model because it's our validator set. That's kind of the architecture of like why we have M1 and M2 is because we want to grow our own community and our own validator set. So every validator that we have has to stake the move token to participate in sequencing fees, which actually creates buy pressure and buy demand for the token because now it's like the utility is to stake the token to participate in sequencing, whereas for layer 2s, the token model is usually like governance and no actual real value for the token. Whereas we have a flywheel effect where if you're a validator from M1, you have to stake the move token, you get the sequencing fees additional to the emissions, and you're actually incentivized to keep launching more nodes. So it's a flywheel effect. We eventually completely decentralize the validator set, and we actually make money doing so. So not only are we financially incentivized to, we're forced to because we're next-gen VM. That's kind of the market we're attracting. Whereas like the traditional EVM L2s in the near to short term don't really want to decentralize the sequencer and probably won't.
So most people that listen to this podcast, I think, are familiar with the way you run validators for Cosmos. How is that going to be different for M1?
Yeah, so because we come to this dynamic consensus, anyone that's running an Avalanche validator can opt in to stake our move token. There's actually a few proposals coming up that deprecate the need to stake AVAX, so you can just stake a native token. You don't need to stake AVAX at all. So that's actually why we chose to build on the Avalanche system, because you can bootstrap validators in a way that is pretty much unparalleled. We inherit the security of existing consensus mechanism. It's the quickest finale in the market. It's extremely decentralized. I can run on my laptop, which is something like going back to the Firedancer example is like the hardware requirements for Solana are pretty high. Firedancer is even like a higher throughput validator set that enables like in theory 1 million plus TPS. So it's like instead of having that debacle where you have multiple validator clients, we actually have a low hardware requirement, and anyone can run their own node.
And when token? And when airdrop?
For legal reasons, I will not respond to you. And for your own benefit.
Okay. Well, I guess that's a good excuse to bring you back on when you have token and airdrop.
Yeah. My legal team will actually kill me if I say anything like that.
We don't want that.
Yeah.
Okay. So talk a little bit about the community program.
Yeah, so I think we always, like me and Cooper, was my co-founder, came from a community. I built the first DEX in Aptos. Cooper built the first EODagger in Aptos. And I think oftentimes the community is forgotten in the situations where it's like you raise a bunch of money, you have a big token, and the community is like completely forgotten. That's like what we're striving to never do. So that's why we have the decentralized validator set. We want people to earn the sequencing fees the foundation is not going to be taking sequencing fees. We're completely distributing that back to the community. We're doing a lot of hackathons and community initiatives focused on student groups. Me and Cooper are both college dropouts, so we understand what it means to be in college and still love blockchains, but not really have the resources or the education to kind of break into that. I think like if you keep targeting the same developer group, we as an industry are never getting anywhere. Whereas if you can tap into Web2 industries, which is actually a big focus of both Apples and Sui coming from Web2 traditional backgrounds, we're also in the same line, going to Web2 audiences, going to college hackathons, and giving them the tools to launch their own Web3 startups. Like, oftentimes you find out like these developer groups want to do something, but they don't like have the resources, the bandwidth, or like have any support. So we're really focused on community initiatives, ambassadorships, hackathons, online initiatives to really target the underrepresented in Web3.
Cool. And how many projects are currently involved in the community program?
I think we have 15 from the ecosystem that have come to the community program. Our final ecosystem number is like 75 at the moment, and we're announcing like 3 every week at this point. But yeah, I think the community program has been really cool because you're seeing a lot of native apps pop up. So like Razor is like one of my favorite wallets that popped up. It's like when we first came on, we didn't even know who it was. Like just randomly saw on Twitter, and I literally sent to my Slack. I'm like, guys, the community program is working. We did it. We did it. I think that's the best feeling. Like anyone can go pay like a big wallet group like $1 million to deploy. Like congrats, you just did what everyone else did. It really feels something to have like a native random developer who just believed the mission and went out of their way to complete the new UX, do new smart contracts, and market it. And Razor is like one of my favorite teams now, one of my favorite wallets. And it just feels great as a founder.
Yeah, I installed it when I saw you tweeting about it.
Yeah.
I can't. I'm looking forward for ledger support, but
Yeah.
it's great UI. Cool. Well, before we wrap up here, wanted to maybe zoom out even more and ask you about, where are you, what's your current sentiment on the crypto market? Obviously, we had the ETF approval news last week, and, just generally, I think people are very excited right now. Markets are up. It looks like we're going to have an interesting year. Yeah, what's your sentiment on the current state of the market and where we're heading in the next 12 to 24 months?
So me and Cooper actually started the movement idea right after the FTX debacle. So we like started like the project when it was like low, low, low. Like people were like exiting the industry and like
That's
Aptosens.
when we started fundraising, so I feel
Yeah,
you.
yeah, man, it was brutal. I mean, honestly, I'm like bullish on anyone who like started or was involved there and still stuck it through. The move thesis actually started as well. Then I think Aptos launched right after FTX went, and Sui launched shortly after. So the moving system was always underdog. Like we started in the depths of like hell, and now we're coming back up. So first of all, I'm an American citizen, so the ETF stuff is amazing. Like hopefully the United States can get their stuff together, and we see a lot more institutional adoption at the government level as well as major banks coming in. So that feels good, just the validating thesis for Americans and the hurrah for citizens all over the country. And in terms of the markets, like obviously price action is going up, and that's great, and that drives narrative, obviously. But zooming out further, like we're definitely seeing a lot more institutions come in. Atlas particularly has done a great job of bringing in JP Morgan, bringing in Onyx Initiative, stuff that people haven't thought about in the past. And we're seeing a lot more institutional adoption, more gaming. Like this year, all the big games are coming out. I think it's like October, November is the target dates for those launches. So it's like hundreds of millions of dollars poured into Web3 gaming are finally launching. And like everyone kind of thinks that Web3 gaming is the first entrance of retail money. So like Gunzilla, Shrapnel, or To The Games, I'm really excited for. On the DeFi side, I think, yeah, it's a no-brainer. When you have more users doing like meme coins and stuff, there's obviously more DEX activity. There's people trying out different UXs. But I think the overall market is trending towards next-gen VMs. Like Solana had this huge craze, and people love the Solana interface. Even if it's for meme coining, it's still better than not using the chain at all. And then Move is shortly following after, so I think the Move is the next cycle of that.
Great. Well, we're definitely bullish on movement and on Move. Disclaimer: Interop Ventures is an investor in movement, and yeah, we're super pumped about about where you guys are heading, and also like really sort of align with your vision for an ecosystem of VMs, and we also think that our sentiment also is that the EVM is not the be all end all, and that in 10 years from now the VM ecosystem in crypto will be a lot different than it is now.
Sure.
Hey, Rushi, thanks so much for coming back on. It's been great having you on again, and I always enjoy these conversations. I always learn so much, and look forward to having you on again in a couple of months when you have lots of other great announcements to make. Maybe a token.
No comment.
At that point, your legal team won't kill you if you talk about a token.
Then I'll probably hopefully be able to do it. But yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure. And if you're at ETH Denver, stop by Modular Day.
We will be at ETH Denver, and I will stop by Modular Day for sure.
Cool.
Thank you.
Guys.